Caitlin Breedlove. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of Women's March. Really happy to have you here today. There are a lot of people signed up for this webinar, so we're just going to take the first 5 minutes and kind of let people really come in. And as you're coming in, if you want to share in the chat your name and where you're coming in from and anything about how you're doing today, we definitely, our team really likes to ask that because we love to see all the different places that people are coming in. And if you're calling in, don't worry about it, no biggie, but would love to see names and where folks are coming in from. It really helps us just give a sense of like, there are so many folks, women and our allies that come on these calls, and it's just really nice to get to hear from everybody and see where we're coming in from today. We're really excited to get to have this conversation with you. And yeah, another note as we're going in is that we have closed captioning for this call. So if you look down on the bottom right of your screen, it should be there and good to go. So welcome everyone, and we'll get started in about 3 or 4 minutes, just giving people a couple minutes to come on in. Welcome. We're happy that you took time to be with us today. Yeah, so hi again, everybody. Those of you who have not been with us before, we usually take the first 5 minutes to just give everybody a chance to come in to this conversation, and we're really excited that you're with us today. And if you want to put your name and where you're coming in from in the chat, that would be really great. We would be excited to get to hear that, or you want to add about a word or two about how you're doing today, we would love to have that as well. For those of you already on, just a little bit of information about the tech today. We are going to try to keep the chat open every once in a while, since these are open calls with open registration. We get some trolls, so then we have to shut the chat down, but we're going to try to keep it open today. And for sure, the question and answer, the Q&A box down at the bottom will be open. So there are going to be a lot of people in this call, so be honest. We don't want to promise that we're going to get to every question, but our team is going to be checking them out and monitoring them all and trying to get to as many as we can. Another note is this conversation is going to be recorded and live streamed to Women's March Facebook. So if you want to go ahead and share it on your Facebook to invite more people into the conversation today, we welcome you to do so. Sometimes the word doesn't get out about conversations that are of interest to folks, so people like to do that. So after the first 5 minutes, we tend to share over to Facebook as well. For those who didn't hear me before, we're providing closed captioning for this webinar tonight. So if you want to access this feature, there's a button at the bottom of your screen. Just click it and you should be good to go. Yeah, so we'll just give people just another minute or so to come on in, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. Really happy to have all of you. It's so great to see from all the different places that you're calling and zooming in from tonight, and some of you just said hi, which is nice too. So really happy to have all of you here. And for those of you that can't join us for this whole conversation, we're going to be sharing it on Facebook. So I know that sometimes what I do is like, when I'm taking care of my little toddler, or I'm washing dishes, or I'm making food, I listen to a Zoom or a podcast or something that I was interested in that I missed from the day. Or if you want to share something with a family member or a friend and you want to share it later, it'll be available too. This is not your only shot at some of this information. So yeah, we're really excited to have folks with us tonight. So let's go home. Let's go ahead and get started. We are going to talk a little bit about the format for this evening, but for those of you who just joined us, I just want to reintroduce myself. I have the distinct honor and pleasure of being the Deputy Executive Director of Organizational Advancement at Women's March, which is a mouthful. And my name is Caitlin Breedlove. My pronouns are she and her. I live in Phoenix, Arizona with my surly, almost 3-year-old toddler. He's about to have a birthday. And I'm really happy to be with all of you tonight and get to lead this conversation. Just once more, for those of you who've heard it already, you know, a little intro to our tech. We're going to try to keep the chat on, lest we get trolls. And questions can go in the Q&A box. It's the little box at the bottom of the screen. We won't be able to get to everybody's questions, but we're going to try to get to ones we can. This conversation will be streamed on Facebook, so you can share it there. And very importantly, there's closed captioning. So if you want to access this feature, there's a button at the bottom of your screen, and you should be good to go. So let's talk a little bit about our sort of power hour here in conversation. We have a pretty tight agenda. For those of you who are on some of our webinars that we've done over the summer and the fall, tonight's a little bit different, and we build it differently, so hopefully it will be helpful. So it's quite a bit of talking from us, not panelists, questions and answers, and we're going to do a couple polls. You're going to hear from a couple of us on our team that I'll introduce in a minute. But we really designed this webinar to meet a need. I know that one of the things that we get to do, and is a privilege to do, being on the staff at Women's March, is actually to be able to think and talk a lot about ideas. We digested a lot of information from the election. We digest a lot of information before the election. And so one of the things we want to do is sort of, again, in the spirit of what so many women's marchers have a hunger for, which is really getting past the fake news in this country to real news. We want to help contribute to all of our collective thinking about this moment that we're in, right? So it's not a hot take space for those of you who kind of have followed the conversation about that. It's really a space about, what do we know for sure? What are questions that we're asking, that we're thinking about? How does some of that braid together? We want to get your specific questions in tonight, and also want to get some information from you about how you're feeling, how you're doing, what your appetite and interest is. And then at the end of the conversation, our team is going to talk a little bit about what we're up to create an invitation if there's things that are appealing or of interest there. So that's kind of how this evening is going to go. And I want to go ahead and ask our team to start the first poll. So if you haven't done the polls before, our team is going to show you how it works. But basically, it's just a way for us to, since there's so many of you on the call, to get your feeling about current events. So the first poll is, how are you feeling about current events? And we kept that question broad because there's been a lot happening. Very quickly, we're under multiple pandemics. And so we want to know how you're feeling. So afraid, relieved, angry, hopeful, other, a mixture. We're going to start that poll so that you'll actually be able to give us more information. And then we are going to share information in real time from the poll, cool technology, to be able to talk a little bit. Mixture would be all of the above. I see someone say, I'm feeling all of the above, exactly. And while people are taking the poll, I want to introduce someone fantastic to you, Jess Smiley from our organizing team, who does our organizing with our Circles program, so that Jess could tell you a little bit about who she is and how she's feeling right now while you all are taking the poll.
Thank you, Caitlin. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Jess Smiley. I am the distributed organizer here with the Women's March, based out of Columbus, Ohio. And ultimately, how I'm feeling, I know some folks said a mixture. That's where I'm at still. The day that the election results were announced, and even in the last couple of weeks, I've been feeling waves, right, of afraid but relieved. So the first day for me, I cried in relief, but also a little bit of anger at my red state. However, I'm also a local organizer and activist here, so I know that the folks with the boots on the ground here in Columbus and across the country made waves and made it happen. My county in particular, we had more voter turnout than in 2016, and we were heavily blue, so that made me feel really good and gave me really good perspective, to know that even though I'm in a red state, like many of us may be, that there are still things that we can keep into perspective and understand more about not just who we are as a city, a state, or even individuals, but as a collective, and how important our opinions and perspectives and feelings are in this moment and as we move forward, so that we can weed through all of the noise and the fake news and make sense of everything and continue to stay focused on the path that we are forging forward on. So I wanted to share all that with all of you and also send big love to all of you as well. I know these times are tough, and it can be difficult to make sense of things, but from one red state person to all of you who may be in different states, we're in this thing, we got it, and we are going to navigate this moment together. So I'm glad to be here with you all. Thank you, Caitlin.
Thanks, Jess. Great to hear from you. We're going to come back to the poll. We're also going to hear from our organizing director, Kate Shapiro, and a little bit more from Jess later in the conversation. So we want to really, the point of this evening is to talk about the moment. So we're not going to do a big advertisement for, what Women's March has done. But I think that, at least for me, when I think about what Women's March has done in the last 4 years, I think about really our commitment as the leadership of the organization, particularly in the last year and a half and two, to really help make Women's March about the marchers and to really bring the focus and shine the light back there. So actually, anytime we talk about what Women's March has done, it's actually what many of you have done. And it's really important and impressive in a lot of ways. So we do want to share some about that. So many of you know already, but Women's March is really a home for everyday women activists. Almost 70%, and some estimates say more, of us as women's marchers are new to activism, and we're really proud to serve as an on-ramp. And as many of you know, we're going to talk more tonight about really new waves of activists who have just come into community work in the last 4 years. And Women's March has seen that intensively, obviously, starting with, at that time, the largest single day protest in the history of the United States. And we are women of every place, race, class, age, gender, sexuality. We're teachers, Lyft drivers, nurses, mothers, grocery store workers, social workers, and so much more. And we've come to Women's March from many places. Some of us marched for the first time 4 years ago. Some of us have been marching for 30 years for different things. And some of us actually marched this first time this October when we did a special march to help bring home this vote. So with a list and pretty active hopping base of over 1.25 million women and our allies, obviously that's online, we're one of the largest grassroots women's organizations in the US and in the world. And we really see ourselves not as top down running all that energy, but as air traffic controllers, directing support, people power, expertise, tools, other resources. We often have distributed actions where people are doing hundreds of actions and we're just providing a big tool chest for them and a space to gather and be in that container. But we really understand, sometimes our leaders are like, nope, back off. I got Albany, New York. Nope, I got Tuscaloosa. I got it. I know what I'm doing. So we are really trying to harness the power of everyday women activists and, in fact, have harnessed the power of everyday women activists because that power is real to build the political power of women in the US. So we know, and this starts to get into sort of the questions of the elections, we now know that a multiracial group of women, when we put our power together, are the driving force in American politics. And we're going to talk a lot more about the breakdown of a multiracial women's politic, but it's critical. So, and I also, especially because there's members of our organizing team like Jess and Kate here, and Samantha doing their tech who you can't see, I would be remiss to also not shout out some of the really unique contributions. So if you look over the last 4 years, Women's March has actually done 13,200 unique actions across all 50 states. So that's really literally people all over the country just using Women's March as a vehicle to bring their voice together. But what's been interesting is, thanks to marchers, not only did Women's March in the first sort of year and few years, and the first march, which politicized so many women, lead to really inspiring a lot of women to run for office and win, to turn out the vote, early voting, all kinds of civic participation, and really in some ways a renaissance of civic public life of a lot of women in their communities. And we're going to talk more about that. But also in this election cycle, you know, we really have been able to, because of the power of marchers ourselves, to harness a lot of political power in this season. So we sent over 13 million texts, and by we, I mean women sent 13 million texts to other women. Probably many of you on the phone were part of that, to women prospective voters. And that was really over the last few months. And, you know, that's really important to us. What's also important we take note of when we're looking for appetite is a lot of the feminist political education series we did, like Feminist Futures, that, you know, they're really like more than 160,000 views. There's a lot of interest, and a lot of that from people who maybe were not that engaged 4 years ago. Our social media and our sort of unique donors are also big things that we look at. We just have a really big social media space, partially because a lot of people like to engage us. I remember when I first got involved with Women's March, I loved that we did a whole Instagram on how exactly impeachment worked. And I saw so many women's marchers actually engage with that question and say, I didn't know before. That was really helpful, right? And then one of the most important things that maybe a lot of folks don't know about us is we are majority supported by donors, and the average gift is about 18 bucks. So we really actually spend a lot of time engaging to what emails folks respond to and different forms of input about what are important to our marchers and our donors, etc. So that's a little bit about, and forgive us if for many of y'all that information is not new and you've heard it before, but wanted to kind of give a sense as well of what we were trying to do, not only in the last 4 years, and we've gone through a lot in those times, and in these times, like, we know every single one of you have, even if we don't know your individual story and why and how. But we also, you know, really want to talk about in the last year and during 2020, how we've thought about bringing the power that we've built to bear and responding to the call to really be as powerful as we could be among many other groups and individuals who fought so hard for this election. Okay, so we're going to dive in and talk about the moment, and then we're going to take some questions so that we make sure that people are really getting, hopefully as much as we can, what they're here for. And so, my goodness, one of my jobs, to be totally honest, at Women's March is to weed through so much information, reading articles, and especially, as I'm sure every single one of you could relate to in this time, really try to weed through fake news to get to the things that are real, and figure out how we make sense and explain and talk about this moment in a way that then makes sense to help guide us forward. So I'm going to share sort of some different thoughts and information. For some of you all, this information might be new. For some, you might be like, okay, 75% of this I'm aware of, but let's try to put it together in a particular kind of way. Okay, so I think, again, we're not going to be, you know, we're not pundits, and we're not statisticians, and we're not political scientists in academia. So we're trying to bring here a snapshot of the moment that is very relevant to the work ahead of us. So one of the first things that I want to say as we think about the future of Women's March is that we were born as a feminist resistance organization. And we are now an organization thinking about what is the role, having defeated Trump, but not Trumpism, and real questions, obviously, until the day that he leaves the White House. We are committed to being vigilant, being prepared for the fight every step of the way. What does it look like to think about building the kind of feminist future that we all need? That includes all of us. There's a place for all of us. And one of the things, and we're going to talk a little bit more around our work around misinformation and especially disinformation. But, you know, one of the things that I'm sure many of us could agree has been particularly painful and difficult in the last 4 years, among many, many things, is just the complete sense of a driving sort of fake news narrative combined with over greed cruelty, racism, hostility, right, towards huge swaths of our communities. And so we want to direct a conversation that's very real about what is real, what's actually real in some of the takeaways from this election, because we think that part of the work that needs to be done and that we're going to need women activists to be engaged in very deeply is the work of also how do we find truth again in media, in politics, in our local communities, because we're jumping in some places to having that hard conversation, but we need to talk about hard conversations that are based in truth, because it's very hard to have a conversation where people are working with very, very different facts, and it's very difficult for the future of politics and civics. That is clearly a serious understatement, but I hope you catch my drift. So a little bit about a few pieces of information. So the first thing I want to say is that we are involved with a lot of experts who have really big questions about the exit polls. And now there's some good articles coming out that are also questioning exit polls. So I just want to name, for folks who might not know, there's a whole bunch of kind of hot take articles that are being based on polls. Those polls are very limited in scope. And there are several problems with it, both the Washington Post and the New York Times. Now, I want to say that it doesn't mean that there aren't some good fragments of information, and we're not trying to defend ourselves from any hard conversations about the polls, but rather to understand that given the unbelievable record voter turnout, which we know for sure is a fact, and the pandemic, it's actually very hard to understand exactly like who was polled in person, who was polled on the phone. And the samples are of a size that most experts would agree quite limited. So I just want to say that before we go on, because I think that there is a conversation about why the polls were so wrong going into the election, and that conversation needs to continue to into exit polls. That being said, things we know for sure: record voter turnout for Biden, also for Trump, very large numbers. And we do know that we have reason to believe that many of the numbers are so large that even if we're looking at the exit polls as what I would call fragmented data, it's still really helpful for thinking about our activism and what we want to do next, if we think about it in that way, if we think about it as an absolute. And those of us who are either from or live in places that have never been really polled correctly, where we know they're asking us the wrong questions, where we know they're not talking to the right folks, that where we're not that surprised when there's a lot more folks that come out and vote Republican than the polls showed. Also, as somebody who's organized for the last 20 years in red and purple states and is from Wisconsin, I would say that again and again, that feels like really important information. So we're going to engage some of that information here because we have to. But I think that it's actually really important to name some of the limits of that. We do know some interesting information, right? We know that among, what's happening in the country, that actually half of the country lives in suburbs, and that's equal to the urban and rural vote combined. We also know that the majority of voters in this country are still white, and that, to be incredibly frank, there were millions and millions of white people that voted for Trump, men and women and people of all genders. We also know, if we're looking at the polls as fragmented data, but somewhat helpful, we know that among white voters, there's some very interesting trends, which again, I want to be careful, because I think there's going to be a lot of studies in the next 6 months and hopefully some really good data. But a couple interesting things is that 61% of the LGBT community overall voted for Biden. As a gay person, I really would like that number to be way higher. I would like it to be up in the victory lap where Black women are, of the high 90s. I don't feel that great about that statistic, but it is a majority. We also know that a majority of Latinos voted for Biden. We also are looking at some interesting data, which we'll talk about more, which I think is preliminary, at marital status. So we found that among white women, unmarried, never been married, and divorced white women voted for Biden more than widowed or married white women. Interesting. And we also know that, you know, if we look at voter turnout, that if this number isn't exactly right, it's still so massive that we have to talk about it, which is that almost 1 in 3 voters is a white woman. So upward of 50 million white women voted. And the reason we think that's an important statistic is that when I talk about these other specificities, geography, are you a single mom, marital status, sexual orientation, age was very interesting in a lot of places. And we're going to talk about state by state breakdown. But it was interesting that like in a state like where I live here in Arizona, it used to be over 65 was always going to the Republicans. Actually, it was 40 to 55-year-olds here in Arizona who really voted for Trump. And I think of it kind of as the grandmother or grand auntie or whatever vote actually went, if you don't have a relationship to kids. But I kind of had many one-on-one conversations here with folks who said, yeah, I used to be a Republican, you know, I'm white and I used to be a Republican and I voted for my grandkids. I voted for Biden for my grandkids, right? So there's some interesting correlations, but overall there is still an age correlation where majority of, I think everybody probably on this call knows, the majority of younger voters, you know, are engaging that. So I want to keep it moving so that we're not so much, we want to get to Q&A and we want to get to some of the other polls, but I think that there's a couple other really important things we have to name. So unequivocally, to be heard very clearly, Black and brown women are the champions of democracy, generally voting for justice for all pretty much all the time. And we know that with Latinx and African-American communities, as example, those are not the only communities of color, of course, but for example, between 7 to 8% of the electorate, sometimes up to 10, it's not enough to win this election. So this election was really won by a multiracial coalition of majority women who were able to deliver this vote. We also think that from a Women's March point of view analysis, there's a couple really interesting points. So who do we think of as the heroes of this election? In a not particular order, but 3 different pieces. 1, grassroots organizations, not big nationals, but a lot of states, local and state, and then national also followed in ways that it seems fit, and we're able to bring home this work. So that's a lot of more veteran activists and organizations. Second, again, in no particular order, hundreds of thousands of people who are new to activism, primarily women in the last 4 years, who got involved who had never been involved before, very key. And then finally, last but not least, of course, simply millions of voters who stayed the course. They just stayed the course, stayed in line, under threats. For many people of color, there was a lot of intimidation. For those of us in very red states, I know that here in Phoenix, people had machine guns on their trucks, like 360 machine guns. So people really endured really very different conditions to vote, and we think that's really important. In that, an interesting thing we're also looking at is that, you know, there's been some assumptions made either explicitly or implicitly in the media about who these women who are new to activism are, who people new to activism are. And, you know, like, honestly, the media has skewed it like it's a lot younger. And some of what we're looking at is that there are many, many women, again, the majority of new activists in the last 4 years are women, and that there are many women, of many of us who are over 40-ish or over or considerably older than that, who actually have brought a lifetime of skills to this work, are new to the work, but aren't new to life. And again, the energy of young activists in new activism should not be, you know, undermined or belittled, but it is very important to see that there's actually been that reality. Okay, one more main thing, because we're not gonna get into like the what's next here. We want to actually stop and take some questions here. Want to say real thing that there's been a lot of conversation about why was it so close? I put so close in quotes because some people feel that it was very close and some people don't. There is not real data that big, bold, progressive policy ideas like the Green New Deal, for example, scared voters away. That is a conversation that's happening between the moderate part of the Democratic Party and further progressives to the left. We do know that we are looking at not real data on that, but we are looking at that there is a lot of popular distrust of elites and institutions, which we're going to talk more about when we talk about what comes next, because obviously we are seeing a lot of very profound impact around failed infrastructure happening for people in this country. It may be that some folks were scared away from the Democratic Party because of rumors of socialism or big, bold policy ideas, but there is not any data that we've seen yet about that. And then finally, this is a very close to my heart point, the states that flipped or came razor close, like Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina, which whether they were won or lost. For folks who don't know, there were really like a lot of long-term organizers and organizing, particularly women, particularly Black women. Here where I live in Arizona, a lot of the Latino community and a lot of LGBTQ people that have been organizing in these states for a decade. This did not just happen that these states flipped or got so close. This was not just sort of national, let's throw some messages in there and people are going to move around. So I want to kind of name those points because I think it's really important to also think about where are the places that we're moving and engaging. I think that that's like a really important space. Okay, so questions. Are there particular ones? And obviously, I feel like if there are specific organizing questions that we want, Jess or Kate, I would definitely invite you all in here as well.
Would you like me to read one or a couple? I've been consolidating. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Well, there's a couple of questions I thought were interesting around why did we adopt the term fake news? And wondering if we are actually adopting and supporting a Trump term. And then, so let's just start with that one. And then there's a number of other great ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question on that's definitely a good one to unpack. And I think what I would say is that, fake news is now, like, that conversation has occurred, like fake news versus real news. I think that one thing I would say, and maybe it's a little controversial, is Trump out-communicated many folks on the left with his ability to speak very clearly. So I think we have to talk about what's real and what's not real. So I think fake news is a way to talk about that. I think we could also just say wrong information. It's just lies. We have found in some of our testing that when you talk about him like lies and lying in a lot of our digital defenders program, it's not that effective. So that's why we use that term. But again, I think I think the data will remain to be seen on that for sure. And I think we're always open to ideas about ways to talk about it better. I think what feels really key is how do we get real information, because it really impacts people's lives, and get back to truth in media and democracy.
Great, thank you. And then these two questions are about polls. One is somebody said, where's the polling data you are citing coming from? They're not challenging what you're saying, they're just curious. So that's one. And then, does the increased amount of early and mail-in voters change the type of data that is gleaned from exit polls?
Both great questions. And the only reason I'm the person speaking on this is because I'm the person that does this particular role of kind of sorting through it, like in the mailroom of the Women's March. So the main polls that I'm talking about that statisticians are questioning right now are the New York Times and the Washington Post polls, which a lot of reporters and other sort of political essayists pull from. So happy to share the details on that, but those are the exit polls that I'm talking about. And yes, the answer to the second question is absolutely yes. Part of why there are so many concerns about these exit polls, even though exit polls, you can definitely see some interesting perspectives on why exit polls often are off. Some folks really feel strongly and make some strong arguments for, but the reason here is that just the number of mail-in, if you're engaging, and some exit polls did make some calls, but again, the sheer number of voters and the number of early voters and mail-in ballots made it very difficult to get a final sweep on it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. Are you ready
Thanks
for more?
For the clarification Samantha put in the box. when I say misinformation, it's when you unknowingly spread lies. Disinformation is when you knowingly spread lies. So it's very helpful, like in the kind of mis and disinformation world we live in. So like, the kind of like think tanks that are spewing out intentional disinformation, right? My aunt that's sharing that on Facebook, that's misinformation. She doesn't know what's a lie. She doesn't know QAnon's not true, right? Sorry, go ahead.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm trying to group some of these together. So there are some questions here about, Trump leaving the White House being one thing, but his influence will not leave the country. So one is this question on what can be done to combat his lasting effect, and also looking at the down ballot races. And also exploring this question of like, what can be done, if anything, to lure back the Republicans who left the Republican Party because of him. So that's one question. Then there's another question that's sort of related, that's about hoping to find common strategies for building bridges and finding common ground between politically different members of our communities. So any thoughts on that?
I think those are two really huge questions. So
Yeah.
again, in the spirit of trying to find truth, I think, and in the spirit of humility, I think Women's March, like many other organizations, is like looking for the way right now and trying to figure it out. I think it's a really huge question about, we can't deny the very large numbers that actually voted for Trump. What I think progressive and liberal news sources in particular, if I may say, especially because I feel like they've been based in places where, we're all shaped by our perspective, and their perspectives primarily generate from blue urban coasts and middle and upper middle class communities. I don't think there's that much great data on all the different reasons for why. I think what we know for sure is that a lot of people voted for Trump's agenda because it was racist, it was xenophobic, it was actually patriarchal. And that is, what Make America Great Again means to them. I think that when we look at members of marginalized communities that voted for Trump, I am interested in knowing why, not because I'm necessarily coming from a place of so much empathy, but I do think we need to understand what that conversation looks like. I think in terms of, what we saw in this country, I think that there's two questions. There's having difficult conversations, which is one subject that we can talk about and interrogate. Is that positive or not? And is it meaningful? Is it impactful? The other question is whether that gets leveraged by the most moderate Democrats. And this is actually something Melissa Harris Perry has been talking a lot about lately. Does that get leveraged to say, oh, we should negotiate heavily with Trumpistic Republicans and sort of give everything away to a moderate middle? And I think those are different things, conversations versus giving things away in the policy negotiations. So I think that is a question. And I also think we're, in a really evolving political landscape. I see that, again, I think that's absolutely right. We're using outdated language when we're talking about red states and blue states. We're going to have to figure out how we reconfigure the map of this country. And some of that is going to be looking for, there's some interesting narrative information. How do we look for common ground without saying we agree on all of this? Are there places where a large percent of this country agree? And then how are we very clear about strong values differences from there? But they're not policy position differences. They're actually values differences. And I think that when I've seen, we've been heavily engaged in turnout, not persuasion, but when I've seen the work be impactful, it's centered on values and it's centered on authenticity. And frankly, it's also centered on an anti-elitism that has been pervasive in political space in many different parts of the political spectrum. So I wanna maybe move on. I know that there's a lot of questions, but I wanna make sure that we get to some other voices from us here as well. And I just wanna name, this is not a conclusive or all-encompassing conversation. We are gonna talk a little bit more, but we didn't even begin to talk about sort of what's happening in the country because of the crisis with COVID and the coronavirus. We've called it the ongoing pandemic of, police brutality and white supremacy, Trumpism and white nationalism, the pandemic, literally in terms of coronavirus, an economic crisis a total crisis of family care, which we know is causing more than 2 million women to drop out of the workforce. Like, we are being hit on so many sides. You know, where I live, there was a distinct part of this year where I was like, everything to the west of me is on fire and everything to the east and south of me is underwater. You know, we are in these very intense acute crises. And I think the thing I would say, and I think this is a good sort of transition into Kate and Jess having a chance to talk more about our work, is that in this moment, we know that we really need leadership, and not leadership that's individual, leadership that's collective, and not leadership that is going to be looking to criticize and tear everything down, but leadership that is problem solving, that's collaborative, that's thinking about how we really re-engage. And I want to say that I saw a note, someone was saying, a lot of activists I know are over 65 too. And I want to say, yes, absolutely to that. And actually, we've seen so many women activists doing very thankless, very invisible work in their local communities, starting in 2016, whether it's building a new community center or flipping their local government. There is so much work that is actually needed in this time to just redefine what is sort of a new deal or a new agreement that this country is going to make with women, because clearly this is a very raw deal that we're in right now. So that feels like an ongoing conversation. So I don't want to take up all of our time talking. I do think there's many, many very hard questions. And I want to say that Women's March has been becoming and working very hard to become the organization that women in the US have told us that they need us to be, or we need us to be, responsive, flexible, welcoming, growing, and also brave and courageous. And so I think that the examples that I'm going to turn it over to our team, Kate and Jess, to talk about, exemplify what we're trying to do. I'm really proud to get to serve on a team with them. So we're going to spend a couple minutes talking about our work in Georgia with the 2 Senate runoffs. That's going to be Kate. And then Jess is going to bring us home with talking about getting involved in organizing circles, as they're both leading in those parts of work.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Kate Shapiro here. I have the pleasure of being the organizing director at the Women's March. I am based in Atlanta, raised in Atlanta as well. And so shout out to the other Georgians on this call. I saw y'all introducing yourself earlier. We are thrilled for the ongoing and long-term organizing that was brought to bear in the amazing flipping of Georgia in the general election. Also shout out to all of us that were playing our different roles and positions in our hometowns across the country. And so loving being on this call as we all collectively discern some of what this moment means for us, and then what our mandate and imperative is moving forward. So I'm just going to talk a little bit briefly about some of what we've got going on in terms of Georgia. I'm not going to belabor the point. We know why Georgia is on the minds of millions. We know what it means for us here in this state, as well as for the country, as well as for President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris, right? What it means to have a Senate majority, or have Kamala be that deal breaker, right? That with that, then all of the relief that our community so desperately need can actually be brought to bear. So we are doing a bunch of different work to support the on-the-ground efforts in Georgia, right? We are a national organization, which means that we want to create meaningful invitations, and we have continually want to make sure that we are supporting and getting up under the long-term grassroots organizers and organizations that have been seeding the ground for this win. We know that it was not just demographics, it was not the Democratic Party, but again, as Caitlin said earlier, it was a testimonial to decades and decades of organizing. And once again, we are in a state where specifically feminists and Black women feminists and Latina feminists have been leading the charge here for a long, long time, but this has been a multiracial effort. So we are doing, well, let's say 3 things, right? And I'm gonna share some links here so folks can get connected with us. 1, we are gonna be picking back up with our Text Back Tuesdays. We are gonna create an invitation for all of you outside of the state to be able to text women in Georgia on Tuesdays. It will start again on the 24th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. So we are going to be doing what we were doing really well leading up into the general for this next round. So get that on your calendars. And we again will be doing the training needed and all of that. So we are going to be first focusing on, again, expanding the electorate, right? Getting folks that are eligible to register to vote, that will be turning 18 before the 5th to vote. And then we will be going on to specifically targeting a lot of single women in the state. So come join us for that. Yes, the link now is in the chat if people want to join us for that. You don't need any experience, no experience required. The second thing that we are doing is that we are partnering with an organization called Song Power. And that is the political and advocacy arm of Southerners on New Ground, a 28-year-old LGBTQ racial and economic justice organization. That's also an organization that Caitlin and myself also have long ties to and worked at for many, many years. So we are going to be collaborating with them specifically to be able to do what we're calling a knock your block canvas, right? So this means that if you are in Georgia, we want to invite you to join us, and you will get training, literature, data, and support to be able to adopt and knock your block, knowing that we already have millions of dollars pouring in, and we are glad to see that money. And it is already super loud here. And we know also, based from our organizing background, that relational organizing and door-to-door canvassing are going to be critical for us to be able to break through some of the sound barrier, to be able to reach our folks and turn our people out. This is not going to be a persuasion campaign. This is a turnout game, baby. So that is what we are going to be doing. So if you are in Georgia and you want to link up with us, we would love to link up with you. We will be starting this more robustly across the state the first week of December. We're doing a little pilot this weekend, so we're going to learn from all of the brave souls that have joined us for the pilot. And then the third thing that we're going to be doing is that we will be, and I saw folks mentioning this earlier, we will be continuing to support the work of the Frontline Election Defenders program. We had thousands and thousands of you all participate in that program across the country, which is a really exciting coalitional effort, really anchored by the Working Families Party and the Electoral Justice Project for the Movement for Black Lives. So we will be continuing to funnel our amazing activist base across the state into the Election Defenders program, where we will actually have folks handing out PPE, answering questions, identifying potential disturbances or voter intimidation at polling locations across the country, both for early voting and for Election Day itself. So those are some of the things that we are doing. And I am happy to hand it over to Jess to talk a little bit more about some of our other ongoing organizing work.
Thank you, Kate. So as Caitlin mentioned earlier, we have organized and built out over 340 local organizing circles. These are groups of 5 to 20, even more. We've got some folks in Illinois who have 60 or more people in their circles. These are groups of local women who not only want to connect to, ground ourselves and figure out how we can stay connected during these difficult times, but also to do the work that impacts our communities, because we know that when we organize locally, we win nationally. Our circles have been doing so much work since earlier this summer when we kicked off our Women to Women Circles program. I'm actually a circle coordinator in Columbus, Ohio. It was super simple to get started. I actually started by asking my friends in my neighborhood, and we had socially distanced text banks on Tuesdays. And that's a great way for, it's a great way for first-time activists and folks to get involved in the work that we do. Many of our circles have been text banking as their groups. They are phone banking and doing local work like hosting events to make sure that they're supporting things that are happening locally in order to continue to build our feminist future and create a world that we all deserve. So this is an experiment we all want you to be a part of. If you want to join or start a circle, we will drop the link for you. Some of our circle coordinators are actually here and they've joined us in the chat to chime in. That of course, circles are super important for local elections. And that's something to keep in mind, right? We know that even though a national or general election is over, we still have work to do in our communities every single day. And we can start by asking everyday women and folks to join us. Some folks have never just been asked before. So this is a great way for us to bring more people into the fold and figure out how we can impact our communities locally and also be prepared on the broad scale to do things nationally. So the links have been dropped for all of you. You can sign up on our map or on our volunteer hub as well. And then last thing I wanted to bring up is that we also have a big set of super volunteers and super volunteers from the election. And we're doing a feminist organizing school crash course in January 2021. I actually went through our feminist organizing school in the summer with the fabulous Kate Shapiro. I will say to all of you that it was probably the best thing that happened to me, not only this summer, but this year. It really opened my eyes to the reality and made it more clear to me what I can do to get involved. It can be a struggle as a Black woman, you know, to feel like I maybe don't have a voice or can't get things going locally, but going through this program and having this experience was crucial for me. So again, we invite all of you to sign up both to start a circle. When you do, you'll get a call from myself or one of our lovely greeters to answer questions, help you get started. And also please make sure that you're on the lookout for our feminist organizing school that'll kick off in January. So I'll kick it back to you, Caitlin.
Thanks so much, Jess. We're going to round it out. Samantha, do we have the poll to share, the first poll? And we're going to do one more.
Yes, we do. I will share the results from poll 1 now. You should all be able to see it.
Awesome. I can't see it. Can y'all?
I can read it out loud if you'd prefer.
Sure, that'd be great because it's not showing up.
Awesome. So about 89% of you all replied to the poll. Our question was, how are you feeling about current events? 18 of you, which is 6%, said that you're feeling afraid. 4%, which is 12 of you all, said that you're feeling relieved. 5%, which is 16 of you all, are saying you felt angry. 20%, which is 62 of you all, said that you feel hopeful. 1%, which is 3 of you, said that you felt something other than what was listed. And an overwhelming 64%, which is 194 of you all, said that you were feeling a mixture of emotions listed above.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to round it out with our last couple minutes. Last question. What kind of activism do you have the most energy for right now? Obviously, we bias this a little bit to our subjects tonight and to what Women's March is doing because we want to be able to follow up with you. So 1, texting and calling. 2, COVID safe local organizing. 3, fundraising. 4, political education and skills building training. 5, other. And Samantha will drop those questions in the chat too so that you all can, as we're finishing up, poll as you want. Again, it's totally optional, just like a way to interact. Yeah, and I think in terms of like how we want to think about the kind of next steps and the ongoing work, we want to name, and I think Jess and Kate did it beautifully here, that we're really like still, like many of you, to be authentic and transparent, like in a process of recovering, recouping. We actually have a pretty small team of folks that run Women's March. Our staff is much smaller than a lot of folks think. So we are doing our best to gather information, learn and grow. And these are the things that we have on board right now. These are the things that we're doing right now, the work that Jess is leading, the work that Kate's leading that we talked about, and our own growing assessment, because we think of ourselves as a learning organization all the time. So we definitely are as interested and as engaged and want to hear from you all and talk with you all about 2021. And we're in a process with our own board and staff team around planning and thinking and reflecting. And we think that's a really important part of leadership. So again, no sort of permanent, all the answers right here, but really happy to be with you all in this work, and wanted to let you know some of the things, how we're just thinking and having conversations with each other about this moment right now, and how we're thinking about the next steps and some things that we know for sure that we are doing. Jess or Kate, anything you all wanted to add?
I just had one quick thing, just because I know I saw a bunch of questions in the Q&A about like, when's the Women's March in January? Appreciate the enthusiasm, for real, for real. We love to see it. And just to be a little bit more detailed, we do not yet have a fully fleshed out plan or invitation created for what our activities will be for the inauguration. And this is for a couple of reasons. One, we are actually exploring doing a mobilization of some type with a broader set of organizational partners, right? Knowing that the actual defeat of Trump was a very, very, very profound collective experience, right? That took all of us. So one, we are in conversation with a number of different groups and organizations about what will make sense for all of us to do together, right? And then secondly, we also are taking coronavirus super, super seriously. And so are in discernment around what would be an appropriate and responsible invitation to create for all of us that would not put us at, in a vulnerable position or further endanger ourselves. So just wanted people to know that we haven't forgotten about it. We want to rock out with you all, and we are in discernment around that. And that will, of course, as soon as we figure out at a national level what's going to make sense, we will put that invitation out to our base more broadly. You all to take, adopt, change, what have you.
Thank you, Kate. Super helpful. Jess, I know there are a couple questions about just how folks could get involved in circles. Do you want to speak to that?
For sure. I did see someone mentioned that they are trying to get in touch with their local organizing group or circle. You can actually visit map.womensmarch.com and click the button to join a circle. You can search by your city, state, zip code. Once you click that button, the circle coordinator or circle leader will actually get in touch with you. And if there isn't a circle in your area, you can start one, and I can help you get one started and get you going. We offer weekly training so that you're not just doing a thing without knowing what to do next and being prepared. And yes, Kate, thank you. You can also contact me at smiley@womensmarch.com. It's in the chat. But yeah, other than that, that's the way that you get involved with your circles. So hope that was helpful.
Thanks so much, everybody. Do we want to throw up what we have for that final poll? Just people might be interested in what other people have energy for. I know our team super is. Great.
Yes, I just shared the results. Do you see it, Breedlove?
I think everybody else can see it except me, so I will look at it after. I'm not gonna make everybody be hearing about it, and everybody else can see it. So just to close out, I want to say, like, we appreciate. I see all the appreciations in the chat. Really appreciate that, and also just we continue to be steadfast in the knowledge that Women's March exists because of y'all. So thank you for everything that you're doing. We're possible because of what you all have been doing and what we've been able to do together. And we are going to continue to be here for you. We came together to defeat Trump, but we know that defeating Trumpism and building the feminist future that we need is a much longer project. And we are not going to be abandoning y'all. We'll be by your side in that fight. So let's continue to get involved, stay together. Any ways that we can help, please reach out to us. You know some about our organizing arms now, and we hope that you'll be joining us for the fight in Georgia in whatever way makes sense for you. And we'll continue to be talking about January as we continue to be building this movement together. So we hope you all have a beautiful evening. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us tonight. We know everybody's busy, has a ton going on. So the gratitude is very real. And thank you also to our fantastic team for being here tonight and for all your work as well. Thank you. Good night.